Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the Burning Issues workshop, and thank you for your punctuality and being here right at 9. And we are going to give a little leeway to the latecomers and give them another couple of minutes to join. So just sit tight or go grab another cup of coffee or a snack, get comfortable. Gonna start in probably 4 minutes here. If you're just joining us, thanks for your punctuality. We are going to get started in about 3 minutes here, just leaving some time for the latecomers to roll in. So you've got another couple minutes if you want to go grab a snack or hit the bathroom one last time. Get started right around 9:05. If you're just joining us, please enjoy these sponsor slides while we give just one more minute for any latecomers to join the session. It's great to see so many people joining us this morning, a snowy morning for some of us, depending on where you're joining from. Thank goodness for the virtual format. So regardless of weather, we can all be here together this morning. We will get started in just a minute here. That's not the right slide to share. All right. Having a little technical difficulty, of course, to start the morning. I'm gonna stop that share. I apologize for the delay. Just a screen sharing challenge I'm having at the moment. There. I do apologize. I think that my computer is just having a bit of a snow day itself. Does anyone else from the planning committee have the welcome slides up and available to share them? I'm not sure what is happening with my computer right now.
Andy or Stephanie, can you pull up that slideshow, please?
What is going on?
This is Amy. Maybe while the slideshow is getting figured out, I'll launch our first poll.
That's a great idea, Amy. Thank you.
Yep, just a moment, please. All right. This poll should be showing up on your screen soon. It's just kind of same questions as yesterday if you were here, asking where you are attending from, your affiliation, and how long you have been working in wildland fire. There are 3 questions on there, so please don't forget to scroll. I'll leave it up for about a minute, and then we'll see what the results are.
This is Craig. I have the slides ready to go unless someone else does.
Say go for it, Craig.
Thanks, Craig. I'm trying to admit people, so I don't want to be multitasking.
I'll leave the poll up for just maybe 15 more seconds.
Thank you, Craig. It's great.
All right, looks like we have pretty good participation in the poll, so I'm going to end it and share the results with you all. Hopefully that is showing up on folks' screens. Looks like a lot of folks from Southern Lower, and then otherwise a pretty equal distribution between Northern Lower, the UP, nearby states and outside of the region. Affiliations are also pretty well distributed, and also with the history of working in wildland fire. So thank you, everybody. Answering those questions really helps us out. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, everybody, for answering those questions and being patient with my technical difficulties this morning. Again, welcome to the 8th annual Burning Issues Workshop and 22nd Michigan Prescribed Fire Council annual meeting. Next slide. Thank you in advance. Well, our speakers from yesterday and today are on here. So thank you to our speakers from yesterday, and thank you in advance to our speakers and panelists from today. We couldn't do this without you. and really appreciate all the time and expertise that you bring to this workshop. Next slide. And also thank you to our organizing and planning team. That includes Andy Vanderyacht of Michigan State University. He is our current chair of the council. Stephanie Deep, affiliated with Jack McGowan Stinsky with the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, and Craig Meyer with the Tallgrass Prairie and Oak Savannah Fire Science Consortium, Amy Fry with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and then myself, I am affiliated with the Lenawee County Conservation District, with my position supported by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Next slide. So this will be a review from yesterday for those of you who joined us, so we won't belabor it too much, but today, if you are having technological difficulties, the first thing to try is logging out and logging back in and see if that fixes the issue. And if that doesn't, then the number on the screen, you can text that or email that. You'll be contacting Jack at that contact information, and he can get any other bugs sorted out for you. Please mute yourself and have your video off. That should be default, but just be sure you should only be unmuted or have your video on if you are presenting or speaking on a panel. We will use the chat box for questions. And also feel free to use the chat box for private conversations with each other using the direct message function. We encourage that sort of networking. We're going to be, for the panels, using questions that were submitted during your registration, along with live Q&A submitted in the chat to guide those discussions. We may not have time to answer all the questions, so just, we apologize in advance if we're not able to do that due to time constraints. I do recommend using the speaker view in Zoom. So if you go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's a button that says view, and you have a couple of different options there. For the best viewing, you might find that speaker view is best, but play with it and see what works for you. All of our presentations and panels today are being recorded and will be available. We're going to post it within the next few weeks after the event on the Lake States Fire Science Consortium and Michigan Prescriber Bio Council web pages for you to refer to afterward. And then lastly, but very importantly, please watch your email for an evaluation link that will be sent out afterward, and your feedback is highly valued so that we can keep improving the quality of this burning issues workshop. Next slide. So this is the agenda from yesterday. We had a great lineup of speakers, talked a lot about growing season burning and smoke management. Very insightful day. Next slide. Oh, okay, and then here we are at day 2. So the lineup for today is we're going to spend about half the morning talking about the Brittle Fire and some lessons learned, and a panel discussion about that. And then the rest of the morning will be on increasing Michigan's burn capacity and talking about the Certified Burned Manager Program with another panel and Q&A. So looking forward to that. You can end that. Thank you. And we will roll right into introducing our first speaker today, which is Kevin Reese. Jumping right into our first session, that Brittle panel session. We're kicking it off with about 20-minute presentation from Kevin Reese. Just to briefly introduce this topic of the Brittle Fire. So for those of you who don't know, the Brittle Fire was a prescribed fire that became a wildfire, and this happened in the Huron-Manistee National Forest in the spring of 2021. So during this session, while we are on this topic, I would just want to remind everybody to please be respectful of our speaker and of our panelists that will join later. and realized that the Brittle Fire incident was factually traumatic, I think, for many people involved in it. And it takes a lot of bravery and vulnerability to come before an audience to discuss it. And they're not doing this for their own good. They're doing this to help share lessons learned and to improve our collective knowledge as a fire community about how to be successful, for lack of a better word, in the event that an incident like this does occur. So we just ask that you please be respectful, and we really appreciate these people having being brave enough to come and talk about this topic with us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin Reese. He is the Fire Staff Officer in the Huron-Manistee National Forest. He is stationed in Cadillac, Michigan. He's been working in Michigan for the past 5 years. And before that, he worked in California on the Six Rivers, Klamath, and Tahoe National Forests. He has been a burn boss for more than 10 years and has been involved in prescribed fire for more than 20 years across multiple states and regions. And he is going to give us some more details on the Brittle and cover some lessons learned. You can go ahead and try to share your PowerPoint. Kevin, hopefully you have a better time of it than I did.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Please let me know if that works.
Looks great on my end.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for the intro. Again, Kevin Reese, the Fire Staff Officer on the Huron-Manistee National Forest. Kind of reading through the poll that we had earlier. Good to see a lot of folks with good experience on this conference, and some folks that are almost brand new to it. So I hope that you find some value in our discussion and learn from some of our mishaps, I suppose, lessons learned. So we've got a couple of slides, definitely attempting to not death by PowerPoint anyone, but more ticklers for conversation, and just kind of building on some of the stuff that we learned on the back end of the Brittle. So we'll jump right in. All right, so for those of you that don't know about the Brittle, it was a planned prescribed fire that was declared a wildfire, and was outside of the box for approximately 4,500, 5,000 additional acres. All of it was still on Forest Service land, no loss to private property, no personal injuries, but still fairly substantial, both in the act of it getting outside of the box and community ties and so on and so forth. So, overview of the Huron-Manistee. We cover just shy of 1 million acres in the northern lower peninsula of Michigan. We're 2 administratively joined forests for some Forest Service jargon, but we have the Manistee zone on the west side of the state, and we have the Huron zone on the east, and covers a large chunk of area and multiple fuel types. So we cover kind of mixed oak savanna on the south end of the Manistee, closer to White Cloud, Muskegon, down towards Grand Rapids, and have mixed oak hardwood or mixed eastern hardwood up towards the Ludington, Traverse City, with a mix of pine oak and jack pine barrens over on the Huron side between Mayo and Oscoda. So pretty diverse landscape. A lot of it is glacial outwash sand, and we'll get into some of that as far as the species that enjoy nutrient deficient sand and some of the trials and tribulations we've had with some forecasting and fire modeling. So I appreciate the intro ahead of this, but I wanted to throw this out as well. This is all intended to build on lessons that we learned from the Brittle amongst the prescribed fire community. We are able to call in almost an unlimited amount of resources to catch something that's outside of the box. And we wanted to approach it with the thought and the intent that passing on some of these lessons to folks that don't have the availability to call 10 dozers and a sky crane so that we can moderate or mitigate some of these issues in advance. And hopefully you don't have to experience this as we went through. We'll also talk about some of the social media response that we've had. So my final sentence, not a fan of reading slides that you can read, but I do want to emphasize that this presentation is not intended to pass blame or point fingers, or especially feed trolls. Usually the folks on burning issues are proactive and here for the good of the order, but we have had some negative feedback, and I would like to avoid that today if at all possible. So moving forward, this is something that I was told many, many years ago, early 2000s. And at the time, it made very little sense to me as a young man. But the more I interact with fire, both in a prescribed fire setting and in a suppression wildfire setting, the more this makes sense. And for new burn bosses, I absolutely do not want to spook you and say that, you know, terrible things are going to happen to you, but to approach it with open eyes and critical thought and realize that there are an awful lot of variables that affect fire, both prescribed and wild. And when we put fire inside a pre-established box, we tend to feel that we have got that figured out and mitigated. And a little forewarning and possibly some foreshadowing for this presentation that sometimes fire does what it wants. And it's not necessarily a wrecking ball as far as a land management treatment option, but it is certainly not a scalpel either. So don't be afraid to jump in the ring, but be aware that if you're going to be a burn boss, if you're going to partake in fire suppression or especially prescribed fire, you are going to have some fast moving days more than likely, and you are going to have some unintended outcomes. So plan for that in advance and think about that as you move forward. Okay, what was planned? So this is the Brittle Unit 20 on the left side and 23 on the right. Approximately 2,000 acres. In the middle of 23, you'll see a white square with black hash. That's private property. So there is a residence in there, and the black capital X hash is dozer line that we have put around it for the suppression feature. So you're looking at predominantly mature red pine in the Brittle area just to the west of Oscoda, Michigan. This is a fairly intensively treated area, both for red pine production and harvesting, for prescribed fire, and for Kirtland warbler habitat. So you've got a mix of planned jack pine stands that are pretty tightly packed for birds habitat. You've got mature red pine. You can kind of see some behind me in my cool background. And then you've got a mix of some clear-cut activity fuels adjacent to this. You've got some areas that have been planted approximately 10 years prior that will be considered a failed Kirtland warbler plant. But for the most part, this unit has been treated 3 times in advance of us going out to treat this. It's seen fire multiple times. We've got good hardening, I suppose, of the trees and the canopy. We've got good base crown height. This is a good spot and a good unit to burn. Again, you know, glacial outwash. All of this sandy plain to the west of Oscoda is sand with maybe a 1/4 inch of duff, very little organic, and the rise and fall in moisture and how fast it dries out will come into play later on. But not a first entry, a unit that we felt fairly comfortable with, and a unit that, due to size, we look at aerial ignition. So we utilize a Type 3 or a light helicopter with a PSD machine to do the majority of the ignitions, with ground firing to solidify our, what we would call baseline or our perimeter. One of the things looking back is this unit can be broken into 2 units. We chose not to, based on efficiency. We had the resources on scene, we had the helicopter, And we felt that we could accomplish this in one day with the resources we have. Okay, what happened? Thought about trying to find some ominous music just to play for 3 seconds, just to build some intensity. But as you can see, it did not go as planned. So to identify kind of what you're looking at, you'll see over just above the legend, that's the original 20 and 23 proposed brittle burn. You'll see these orange zigzag lines. Those are the track logs of our aerial ignition. So we have a GPS responder in the ship, both for tracking for this, so we can look at fire effects later and see if we need to adjust, but also to address worst case scenario. If a ship goes down interior, we have a way to locate it and expedite getting them out. Looking to the east, you'll see all of the pink of the brittle running and where it went. And then off to the right side of your screen, you'll see a couple of white chunks with black dots in them. Those are private property, and the black dots being squares, or pink squares being houses, structures, whether seasonal or fully occupied. So adjacent, you'll see orange fuel breaks that have been put in place for the past 10 years. And they expand across the Huron and Manistee side of the forest, but strategically placed to take fire out of the crown or potential ground fire running at a community or a subdivision, reduce that fuel, put it down on the ground where we can either make a stand or lessen and slow the impact of fire slamming into these communities. So as the brittle started off in the morning, we had tried to burn the brittle several days prior and did not get the fire effects that we were looking at. It was too cool. We weren't getting good consumption. Referring back to some of the conversations yesterday about severity and intensity and seasonality, we're not opposed to a mosaic burn, but it was a little too cool. So we put this on the back burner, gave it a couple of days to dry, and a couple of days prior to this, we burned just to the north of this in some jack pine and saw desirable effects. So came back to this. Started ignitions, hand firing, built up a baseline on this national trout pond road. Everything was going good. Got the helicopter up, started aerial ignition, and then maybe 2 hours into it, started to see some fire effects that weren't desirable. Got a couple of unplanned for winds, and ultimately things started picking up. Changed firing to try and solidify these lines a little bit more, just in case we did have fire push these hard, and ultimately started to get some spots over into and across the national trout pond. And then it got into a failed Kirtland warbler habitat, built up some steam, and we initiated a crown fire that ran to the east. So I know it's kind of hard to give that 2 minutes to talk about it and move forward, but for the sake of time and hopefully giving you guys a chance to build some questions for the panel, just doing a brief overview. So what was learned? We had both successes and we had failures or things to learn from. And I think it's important to both focus on the positive, because there's too much negativity in the world as it is, but we can't shy away from the mistakes that we made, hence trying to be here and trying to learn as a group so that hopefully we make less of these mistakes, or if we do, or if it happens again, I suppose, that we lessen the impact. So one of the successes, and I firmly believe this, is that luck is the combination of preparation and opportunity. So we had done quite a bit of work prior to this pre-season, both with fairly intensive treatment of this area, with preparation and burning of these fuel breaks in advance of what we were planning for was wildfire, but they ended up coming into play regardless. Talking with local cooperators, Michigan DNR played a huge role in the success of picking this up. and borrowing resources to get this thing corralled, but also local communities, emergency managers, local fire departments. We had done multiple trainings with unified command and what this might look like. And the emphasis I'd like you to take away from this, if you do take any, is planning for this. Because when things are moving fast and you're surrounded by fire, that is a terrible time to try and make a plan from experience. So putting the legwork in advance, this PACE model of primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency will make things so much smoother. Even if the plan falls through and you only have 60% of it, having those multiple options and communicating that to your folks and your cooperators will pay dividends well into the future. As many details as you can feed into it, the better. A vague plan will give you vague results, but also understanding that no plan survives the first shot. So being realistic, being appropriate with it, and communicating what you think is going to happen, what you're planned for, and what you're going to do. I can't emphasize that enough. Some of the stinging lessons that we learned from, again, getting into glacial outwash sand, getting into an area that's surrounded by water on 3 sides here on the Manistee, and I guess I consider the Mackinac a third one, but that's dealer's choice. It's pretty hard to forecast. And so talking with the Weather Service, using our own remote weather stations, trying to model fire, we started getting the feeling that the forecasts that we were getting were not representative of the local conditions. And that bit us in the butt. And learning from that, there's an awful lot that goes into the forecasting. There's an awful lot of the formal forecasts, and then taking that and validating that out in the field, kicking sticks, breaking, kicking duff. It's super important to bring that in and solidify that. It ties those two together. And force multiplier of many small factors that, stack up on top of each other. We were in, I guess, the lowest level of drought. So we were D0 by the drought monitor, but that did play into it. Building on the forecast that we missed was a larger than predicted RH drop. And that's something that's pretty common on the sand plains and Pine Barren. But again, something that negatively affected us, as well as cloud cover and adjacent fuels. So being mindful of that, being students of fire weather, as well as fire effects and fire behavior, will pay dividends. And again, building on some of the successes, this seems super obvious and kind of funny to me, but stopping ignition when things start going fast. I've seen a lot of people hesitate from that because that means that something has gone wrong. There's an emotional connection to that. And if you are ceasing ignition, something bad has happened that you might not have planned for. It happens, but it's awful hard to pick up fire once you put it on the ground. So if things aren't going good, hold up on ignitions, take your time, see what you got, and communicate that. If you do get to the point, and again, I hope you don't, where you do have to transition from super cool prescribed fire for all of the cool ecological benefits, all of the stuff we're all interested in and why we're here, and you have to shift gears into a protection of life and property, communicating that clearly and concisely so folks understand we have transitioned into a fire. And communicating that to whatever unit agency is responding to that so they understand. One of the things that is hard to wrap your mind around, hard to capture, is the rate of spread once a ground fire initiated in the jack pine. We were looking at 1.5 miles to 1.75 miles per hour. And 1.5 to 1.75, just as a number, isn't that impressive. But to really get fire romping like that, it really limits your decision space and your ability to get ahead of it. And realistically, you can't, the way that it's moving. So fire modeling comes into play, and something to be aware of if you're burning in a problematic fuel model. We also miscalculated the emotional response from our folks. When it got outside of the box, we have folks that took, I would consider, more risk than what we normally take, because they had that emotional connection, and they had the worst case scenario of, you know, our prescribed fire program is done, we've lost a burn, we've got to catch this. And we put the blinders on a little bit, and you lose awareness of what's happening. And we got super lucky that we had some folks that took some heat trying to get around this thing. And I would prefer in the future that we don't do that, for all of the reasons. And I think this one's super, super important. I know I'm getting close on time, but if you're going to be a boxer, you're going to get in the ring, you're going to dance around, you're going to get punched. And so you're going to question whether this is the thing to do or not. I certainly did. And I think it's important that you take the time to ponder what happened, to work through it, to learn from it, but also to realize that you got to get back in the saddle, because we've got 100 years of fire suppression that got us to this point, and it's going to take us 300 years of treatment to get us back out of it. And burning appropriately in the right spots with the right time and place and people is incredibly important as a tool for ecological restoration. A couple other successes, you know, we went through a facilitated learning analysis. So a third-party group came in, they evaluated everything that we did. They picked it apart, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And while extremely uncomfortable in sometimes, you know, they pointed out some glaringly obvious blind spots, you know, looking at it post-review, and really gave us the opportunity to go back and to take that constructive criticism and work on our prescriptions, work on how we look at forecasts, how we validate forecasts, and how we communicate that both internally and with the National Weather Service. And the last one here, I think, can be a positive and a negative as well, but the preoccupation with failure. We can be our worst critics, but we can also learn from our mistakes and hopefully implement that into future planned events so that we mitigate it. So I'll close on these last two things. And I think that we can, or will speak to this a little bit in the panel, but we received a hellish social media response post Brittle. And that is not something that I personally had planned for. I'm not in the public relations department of my agency, but I was shocked with some of that. So if something bad happens, I would preemptively tell your folks to just turn their phones off, or do not look at social media till you get your mind wrapped around it. And some folks deal with it differently than others. You know, everyone's strong until they're not, and you have to allow folks to work through that, because you have to acknowledge something bad happened and give people the space to work through it. Some people are going to be super reluctant to get back on the horse. Some people are going to try and do it way too quick. So use your best judgment, know your people, and watch for what's happening. So that's the end of my Brittle presentation. I appreciate you guys letting me come in to speak to this. And again, just emphasizing, you know, don't be afraid to get in the ring. Don't be afraid to put some fire down and learn, but also have a plan in place. Communicate that with your folks and hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And I think your days will end smoothly. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. I can see from the chat that we're already generating some great questions from the audience. But before we dive into the panel and Q&A, we have one more question for you. We've got a quick poll. Amy, if you want to launch that.
Yep, just a moment, please. And you should see that poll coming up on your screen any moment now.
So the poll question is, have you ever been involved in an unforeseen incident related to prescribed fire? For example, a medical issue, an escaped fire, a smoke issue, or something else? Or have you been involved in a near miss of an incident? Just seeing what kind of experience that we all bring to the table here and how we might relate to this this topic. Got a good number of responses so far. Looks like it's slowing down.
Yep, I'll let it go for just a few more seconds and then I will end it and share it.
Sounds good.
All right, looks like responses have stopped, so I'm going to end the poll and sharing the results now.
So it looks like we've got more than half of the folks in the room in the session today answering yes to this question, 22% saying no, which may, if I recall the numbers from yesterday, about 20% of people in this session may have never even worked with prescribed fire before. So, oh, I'm confused. Okay, so that's the next question. So 20% of people who have worked with prescribed fire before have not experienced an incident. And then the other 20% that I was thinking of have not been involved in prescribed fire. So thank you for sharing that, everybody. Looks like some great experience in the room there. So now we're going to roll into a panel question and answer session. So Kevin, you can stop sharing your screen and we will get our videos on for our 3 additional panelists that have been so generous to join us today. And here we go. So I'll just going to briefly introduce them and then give them a little more time to introduce themselves and their involvement with the Brittle. So okay, so Katherine Cooley is a panelist joining us today. She is coming from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, and she was involved in the Brittle, brought in as a partner agency to help with the public information response to the fire. We also have Joshua Veal, who works for the Huron-Manistee National Forest, also as a public information officer involved with the Brittle as well. And then we have Eric Toman, who is joining us from the Ohio State University. And he is a social scientist, a professor of social science, and specifically focusing on natural resources research questions. So we also have a 5th panelist who I will try to be representing today, who had to bail at the last minute, but I do have some responses from him that I will try to interject as we go, and that is Lee Osterlund of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, who was also involved in the response to the Brittle as a partner agency, coming in afterward to assist with the response. So I will go ahead and give you each just a couple minutes to introduce yourselves more and kind of explain your involvement or whatever, your relationship to the Brittle Fire. Katherine, you want to go first?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Laura. My name is Katherine Cooley, and I'm a wildfire prevention specialist for the Wisconsin DNR. I also serve on the Eastern Area Incident Management Team, which responded to the Brittle Fire about a day after the incident occurred. Our team was there for about a week, handling anything that Josh and the forest didn't want to handle. So just helping support the communications aspect for those 9 days following the ignition.
Great. Josh, you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Joshua Veal. I'm the Public Affairs Officer for the Huron-Manistee National Forest here in Michigan. Prior to this, I spent some time on the Klamath National Forest in Northern California, worked on the Modoc as well, and fire there, fire prevention. Spent some time on the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee working Spent about 15, 16 years in wildland fire, prescribed fire, and then moved into the fire prevention and messaging. So that's just a little bit of my background. Good to be with you all today, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. And Eric?
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here and join you and be able to join this panel too. I'm excited for our conversation. So my name is Eric Toman. I work in, I'm at Ohio State, social scientist. I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. I've actually worked on, since I started graduate school back in 2000, I've been working on fire and fire issues as a social scientist. So largely looking at initially at what were the factors that influenced acceptance of things like the use of prescribed fire, use of mechanized spinning and other fuel treatment methods, and have worked on a variety of questions around fire management, whether pre-fire or during fire or even some post-fire questions as well with communities. I've been here at Ohio State for about 14 years now, and I work with Jack in the Lake States Fire Science Consortium as well.
Great, thank you everybody for being here. I'm gonna kind of kick off the panel with a couple of my questions, and then we will kind of be rolling in questions from the audience as we go through here. My first question for the panel, starting very broad, what is the most important lesson you learned from the Brittle Fire or from a similar incident elsewhere? And I will kick it off with Lee Osterlund's answer that he sent me. So again, Lee Osterlund was from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources as a partner agency responding. And he said that his most important lesson was that it's important for all cooperating agencies to stay in communication with each other as to what occurred and be upfront with one another and supportive, recognizing that we all have our policies and procedures to follow. The facts will come out eventually, so own up to what happened and everyone can benefit from the lessons learned situation, which is a big part of what we're doing today. So anyone want to jump in with their most important lesson learned?
Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump in with my most important lesson learned. And I think this could also apply to everyone in prescribed fire. A lot of times when you're planning your fire, your prescribed fire, you have contingency resources and other pieces of equipment, dozers, engines, personnel that you identify as a contingency in case you have a new start or you have an incident within an incident. Those types of resources are going to respond to that. One lesson learned for me is to have a plan for the unplanned. Okay, yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. And I would encourage the prescribed fire managers to have that plan for the unplanned. It's like that obscure tool you have in the bottom of your toolbox that you may never use it, but it's good to have it if you do need it. And I think for me, communication wise, it's always good. And even for you planning ahead in your burns to have that communication contingency, a communication contingency when stuff does go south, when to use Kevin's analogy, when you're the boxer and you take it right in the chin or right in the nose, you need to be able to have a plan to draw on and kind of research while you're fighting through the tears, if you will, to kind of gather yourself up. So that was one of my lessons learned, was to have that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off of Josh. I think something like this happens, you gotta own it. You gotta take control, take command of the situation, and manage it, and have that contingency plan in place. And you gotta get ahead of it. You don't have the luxury of time to think about that. And I think that host unit, they had a lot going on, and there were a lot of emotions involved. Bringing outside resources. If you think you need one public information officer, order 3. You're certainly going to need more than you think. For me, it was a very unique situation where I'm used to managing, wildfires, which are evolving, ongoing incidents. This fire was out, it was done. We were Monday morning quarterbacking all day on this one, and it was critically important to get everybody on the same page with talking points and making sure we had a united message. And I also think that you can't hang your head on the facilitated learning analysis with the public. They're not interested in knowing what's going to come down the road 10 months from now. They want to know what happened yesterday. So you need to have a story, have your talking points figured out. And I would recommend identifying somebody who can represent your agency and the incident. Those folks who are directly involved, they have emotions, they have all these things, but find somebody that you can tap into who can carry that message and own the incident on their behalf. I think that was a really good stroke of business that we kind of figured that out a little bit down the road. We waited a couple of days to do a public meeting, and I think we should have done it a little bit sooner. Again, that was a big lesson learned from my perspective.
I'd like to jump in on that if I can. Again, we're big government. We got folks for all sorts of stuff, but there's a lot of folks that are attending that are not, NGOs working for municipals. And so it's super important to have that public interaction, that media interaction. And if you don't have that identified, whether it's someone in your department or someone standing next to you, it's going to be the burn boss. And that is the absolute most wretched thing to happen to you when things are moving fast. And so, again, that goes back to planning, it goes back to communication. And I like what Josh said and what Katherine said, having that contingency of messaging in your back pocket. If you have someone that works with you that's overly charming and can speak well, use them. Make sure that you kind of have a plan and make sure that they can speak to what you were trying to do. From experience, again, I'm not in public information. I've only been in suppression for my career. It is awfully difficult as a burn boss, as an IC, to manage a chaotic situation with a camera in your face and people wanting to know what's going on. So save yourself the heartache and the pain, because we owe it to the media first and foremost. They can be our biggest enemy or our best ally in messaging and getting that out there. And if you scorn them and you don't allow them to get what they want, they're gonna change the narrative, and more than likely you are not going to be aired in a nice, positive way. So something to consider.
I'll just start by saying, so I had no direct involvement with the Brittle Fire, and I want to sort of acknowledge that up front. And so I really want to give space for the conversations around that, and I really appreciate the willingness of everyone to come forward and speak about this. I think this is, I'm hugely impressed with your willingness to do so and what's been shared. I totally reiterate everything that's been said here. And just note, I think there can be a tendency to want to sort of close ranks and sort of come inward in this moment, and totally understandably. And there's a lot going on. And so I just reiterate, I think the importance of sort of owning the message and being out front with this. Ultimately, if there's a huge interest in that information, and if it's not coming from the agency, or there's messaging that we're controlling, there's still going to be messaging happening. So rather than leaving that vacuum that will be filled by other voices, I think it's important to be able to put our voices in there. And absolutely not an easy time or an easy way to do it. And there's a lot of challenges tied up with doing that. But it is really important, I think, early to be able to be upfront and open and communicative about it. And I think, the point Kevin made too, everyone who's part of the agency or the organization involved is going to be seen as a potential messenger around this too. And so that can be really challenging. I think the idea of having consistency in messaging, identifying who those point people are. So maybe your response is simply to direct people to others, but no, people will come. I mean, everyone's going to be receiving questions about this, and to be prepared for how to deal with that is important too.
Thank you for those insights. Yeah, kind of building off of that, what you're saying, Eric, about the messaging is going to come from somewhere, no matter what, there will be messaging. If any of you have an idea of like the biggest misconception or misperception that you have heard around the Brittle Fire, or if you can't think of anything for that, do you see any silver linings, I guess, from the incident? I think Kevin probably already touched on a couple, but if there's something that you wanted to highlight there. So a misconception or misperception that you've heard about the Brittle out there, or a silver lining from the incident that you'd want to share. Kevin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I think it is super easy to say that you're cooperators or your best friends, or you all get along good when it's a bright sunny day with no wind and no fire on the ground. But you will absolutely test those relationships with fire outside of the box. And again, building those relationships, but not just once, maintaining them, having discussions. One of the points that Lee brought up is, communicating that and letting folks know that, hey, we're going to be burning over here, or here we're going to be doing this, so that they can also work on that messaging. It's incredibly important. And I think that a lot of the successes that came from the Brittle was that pre-planning and those cooperators, because we could not have done it by ourselves. And when things start moving fast, having to make those calls, we had support from all around. And that was because of that work that was put in prior, and that common operating picture, not to get too much jargon in on it.
And Lee agrees with what you said in his sort of response to that question too, that owning up to what happened immediately allowed for that quicker turnaround, to kind of keep rumors from starting, and they starting working on recovery and eventually focusing on the good things, silver linings, like the quick cooperator support, and the focusing on the fuel breaks that did their jobs and other things that went well. Katherine?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, so when I was involved in some of the cooperator meetings with the local governing, agencies, emergency services, and one of the silver linings that I witnessed was they were talking about evacuations. There was a lot of confusion. There were about, 30 or some homes that were evacuated with this fire. And there was a lot of confusion about who was supposed to make that call. And it really forced them to have some of those hard conversations. Fortunately, no homes were lost, no injuries. So it's a good learning opportunity to get everybody on the same page if something really goes wrong in the future. So that was definitely a silver lining.
For me, I think the biggest misconception, I've been thinking about that since I saw the question. And I don't know, it seems like there was a contingent on, like Kevin touched on social media, that, just like people perceive that we just didn't care. We go willy-nilly and do things, that's not true. We have a lot of hard-working people that really care about their forest and their communities, and they want to improve the forest health and resiliency. And they come to work every day with their lunch bucket, and they go out there to make things better. So, I think that we should be very proud of the hardworking folks and cooperators and our partners that all come together and work to improve our forest health. So, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that too, another misconception that I really witnessed was that a lot of those folks, those directly impacted homeowners, they weren't the ones who were, the naysayers out there who were on social media. Those people were very supportive of the efforts. They were grateful. We talked to them, face-to-face contact. It was a lot of outside influence that brought the negativity. So I think that was a big misconception too. I think there was a lot of outside organizations or anti-government that was feeding a lot of the negative social media out there. So as far as the people who were, directly involved and directly impacted, those fire departments, all very, very positive responses.
I just had a quick thing to add too. I think to Kevin's point about creating those relationships with agencies beforehand, hugely important with the cooperators. And I just wanted to add to also engaging with the local communities beforehand. I think as Katherine was just noting too, I think you know, the idea, once you do this, they might not be directly involved, right? They're not going to be involved in response, but in terms of developing resilience to those relationships. So there is opportunity, there's trust that's there. So that after you're not trying to build that after the event, right? That there is an ongoing relationship. And I think to Josh's point too, that, you know, the more that you're able to do that, the greater the recognition will be really of the, you know, the quality of the individuals working, the goals of the agency. And you can begin to develop those and understanding of those in the local communities. And my sense, as Katherine was just saying, like that was done. I mean, ultimately, it feels like the local residents responded in the way they did because those relationships had been developed. They knew the quality of the people working there and the goals of the Forest Service and other cooperators working in this environment. And that's hugely important, I think, to provide that resilience to those relationships afterwards. So just wanted to add that too. And I think the point too that Katherine's making is we often talk about the public, but there's lots of publics and they're going to be responding differently to this. And, you know, some will come in predisposed to distrust because of other things. And so this anti-government sort of I see we saw a comment about that too. And I was feeling that in some of the comments made. I mean, that's absolutely a factor that might come through here. You know, but ultimately that's likely a small portion of the publics, but they are different publics and they may need different messaging. And there may be some that we're not going to reach, honestly, that well. But I think the importance is recognizing those that we can really connect with and reach more effectively, and that they're not all the same. You know, ultimately that we might need to communicate with them differently. And just because we hear very loud voices doesn't actually mean they're representative of the larger community or those within the local area where we're working.
Absolutely. These are all great topics. I want to kind of give a little space for audience questions at this point. Amy, do you want to highlight any questions we've gotten in the chat so far?
Yeah, I think this is a really good time to kind of jump into the communications with the public, just because the flow of the conversation is going there. I'm curious how frequently the HMNF tells stories in the media about the many prescribed fires that went as planned and had positive social or ecological impacts, or put a positive spin about how the pre-constructed fire breaks did their job in stopping the wildfire from damaging private property. So basically, has there been any really outreach by HMNF to, put a positive spin on things?
Oh, absolutely. Just yesterday, I did a story with the Osco County Herald and the East Tawas City Fire Department chief. We talked about the fire breaks. That's a really good question. Thank you for that question. We do interact with the local media there on the ground in Oscoda to get our messaging out about the positive things and the positive ecological impacts that the fire breaks, the mechanical thinning, all the work that we're doing. I think one of the messages that we talked about was we've treated almost 10,000 acres there around those local communities. That was part of our messaging we got out yesterday. We also have another 4,000 acres planned for this year to treat around those local communities around Oscoda, Huron Shores, that eastern side of our forest. And we also have an additional 4,000 currently in the National Environmental Policy Act process, the planning process. So we do get out and we do actively reach out to our local media folks and other partners. I have a partnership coordinator that is currently working as well to get our messaging out. So again, thank you for that question. Good question.
Did anybody else want to jump in on that one before I throw out maybe one more question while we're on this topic? All right. The other question that I think kind of ties in, it's getting a little off there, but about community involvement and how they can support. There was a question for communities affected by fire. Is there an organization that members from the community can partake in or volunteer with to support those affected?
I'll jump on that. So there is all kinds of resource out there, but fire safe councils, fire safe communities, fire-wise protection, and I suppose workaround structures or private property are all out there and available for folks. There's funding for communities that come together and combine into a fire safe council or a fire safe community. There's opportunity for fire folks to come out and do an on-site evaluation of private property on the individual basis for fire-wise, where we can take a look at, what could put your property at risk, whether it's vegetation, whether it's ladder fuels, whether it's leaves. We can give you some pointers. We can point you towards some local contractors that can help you with that, or some ideas to solve it. Awful lot of information available online for that. And if folks are interested in that, or folks have questions, I know my slide isn't up anymore, but if anyone grabbed my contact info, I can also add it in the chat. I can get you pointed in the right direction.
Thanks, Kevin. There's a lot of great comments and questions, but I think I'll reserve some of them for later and pass the conversation back to Laura for this moment.
Great. Yeah, I am curious to know from the panel, and I don't want to beat the social media thing too hard because I know it's kind of not a pleasant subject, but did want to ask, so the public did use social media to sort of harass and provide very negative feedback to individuals, partners, agencies. And so for those who have already faced this, or for who may someday face this, or a scenario like this, do you have thoughts on the best ways to stay positive? And we sort of touched on this already, but also foster a useful dialogue with the community with that tool. Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I'll take that one. And one of the things we did was we tapped into those local fire departments. Those volunteer fire departments are huge, right? They are in the community, they're community members. People love firefighters, so jump on that. It's a great way. They're your neighbors. So what we did was we did kind of try to take a positive side, right? We had, I think, seven communities involved, 7+ fire departments. So we had one of our public information officers go around and take a photo at every one of the fire departments with their apparatus outside. And the Huron Manistee did a social media post thanking them for helping us with this event. And I mean, were there any negative comments? I would say there were probably very minimal comments. When you're thanking people for doing hard work, doing good things, civic duty, that's a good way to bring in some positive messaging.
And posting that on social media.
And posting that on social media, yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. Great. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think Catherine covered that very well. Nothing much to add to that. Thank you.
Great. And then a similar follow-up question that was actually pre-submitted through the registration form. Somebody wanted to know, what can fire council members and other organizations do when they see public backlash regarding a prescribed fire event, which kind of ties into our discussion of partnerships too, and how can partners support after the event?
So what can fire safe council members do? Can you say that again, Laura?
Yeah, what can fire council members and other organizations do when they see public backlash regarding a prescribed fire event? And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I think so. I worked with some fire safe councils out in California. I worked with several of them. We had over 30 in our single county. And a lot of times we would do support letters with those fire safe councils. We obviously had a partnership with them, and they were very helpful in just talking to local community members that maybe didn't have all the information necessary that they would need, and we would rely on our fire safe council members to go out and to talk to those folks, and just let them know, hey, this is kind of what, I see what you're seeing, but they would kind of meet them and give them the correct information or maybe more information about what they were seeing. So I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, I'm going to show my ignorance here. I'm not sure that we have fire safe councils in Michigan. I know we have, the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council, but maybe Kevin.
Okay, so I'm talking about two different things. Sorry. So you don't have fire safe councils here in Michigan. Maybe that's something we need to look at because, you know, with our communities at risk and climate change and, you know, the drought monitor kicking in, maybe that's something to look at as well.
Any panelists want to set the record straight? Again, it's my lack of knowledge and experience here. I think it's confusing.
I honestly don't know. I know that the funding source is available. I know it's a national program. So my assumption is that there are, but I could be completely wrong on that. I think that, you know, the consistent messaging, you know, we've talked about that. We've talked about getting out ahead of it and owning it. I think there is extreme value in cooperators, in fire safe, in VFDs, because we get the, you know, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And that is not always well received. And you know, the door is shut before we even get to speak our piece. Whereas, you know, even if the messaging is not word for word, you know, the community members, those organizations have a voice, have respect, have rapport in those communities and can speak to, you know, whether it's the ecological benefits of fire, whether it's the reduction of hazard fuels in the wildland urban interface, you know, that can speak to maybe why they do it. They don't even have to buy in with us, that we're an easy target, but you know, that solidifies the message that, you know, the show must go on. Yep, something bad happened and we own it and we need to learn from it, but we can't stop because the problems will increase and houses will burn. So being able to speak at the dinner table, to be able to speak at the gas pump, you know, wherever that messaging takes place, I think has extreme value and carries that message an awful lot farther than we can through a lot of our channels.
I think that was a great response, Kevin, and sort of addressed another question that was in the chat, which said, what are we doing to ensure that the negativity does not get enough traction or reduce, or worse yet, stop the use of prescribed burning? It sounds like from all of you, it's about education and outreach and expanding how we think about those things. Maybe it is a conversation at a gas pump, and maybe it is events, and just sort of broadening our scope on that. So back to you, Laura.
Yeah, it's definitely. So yeah, we're kind of getting into the partnerships question too. And I wanted to touch on, is there a way that we can further foster the relationships that we do, the partnerships we do have established? And then also, can you think of any untapped or underutilized potential partnerships out there that you'd like to bring up? And I think this is coming back to the audience question that I was kind of interpreting poorly. And I see someone from the chat was clarifying the audience question about the fire council members. They were saying it's more about what can people in this audience do, the people hearing this this talk right now. What ways can we as a fire community be supportive as partners? So fostering the partnerships we have, and then are there untapped or underutilized potential partnerships out there that you can think of that you'd want to suggest that we kind of work into?
That's a tough one. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's all hands on deck, you know, right? Both for getting it done, for getting fire back on the ground, for messaging, for education. I think it really does take all parties. You know, as a government agency, we have our own bureaucratic filters that we have to sift through, and there is a bog in the system, but trying to work with the state, Michigan DNR, trying to work with NGOs, you know, Steve Woods with the Huron Pines, trying to work with the Nature Conservancy, trying to play to all of the strengths of all the agencies that we can to build a better service and a better product. It takes time, it takes effort, but I think, again, just like everything else we've talked about, it does pay dividends when things start moving fast and things get sporty, I suppose. I'm not sure if I answered that question, but I hope I took a good swing at it.
Well, we all know that no one organization can work alone to change these conditions we have on the ground. So I think it's just, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. It's just something we have to work at. you got to keep working at those partnerships and keep reaching out, keep those communication lines open, and keep going.
There is a comment in the chat. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it boils down to basically that local fire departments often have to respond when a prescribed burn gets out of hand, at least in the southern lower Michigan area. And basically outlining that those local fire departments don't have much experience with wildfire. And I think, would there be any opportunities for cross-training or a stronger partnership between agencies and local fire departments?
That's a tough one as well. Here we go. So, I mean, that's tough. I absolutely agree. You know, experience and exposure is the foundation for risk management and safety, right? So getting folks out, getting folks on the line, dragging the torch, best way to learn about fire, I believe, is prescribed fire and seeing how it's burning. But you've got all of the factors at play with requirements for qualifications that we have, just with the fact that it might be a Tuesday morning and a volunteer fire department is a volunteer basis. And so people might have to go and do their real world thing and go do their job, and they might not be able to come to an unpaid training out on a prescribed fire or something. So it's not an ideal situation by any means. We have upped our game, working with local cooperators, trying to do pre-season, both fire suppression training and prescribed fire awareness, so that if we're applying some of the lessons from prescribed fire and trying to burn off a road, we don't have somebody coming behind us with an engine spraying that out. So it's messaging, it's exposure, it's time and commitment. So I think that all parties could probably be better at it, but definitely understanding and agreeing with the need to continue with that.
Eric, did you have something you were gonna jump in with a minute ago?
Yeah, but it was off topic now. I don't actually remember what it was necessarily. Oh, you know, the one thing I was going to say is just in terms of the engaging with partners to just, I think one sort of from like the literature on communication and communication effectiveness and things like that, people are, you know, not surprisingly, there's different sources of information. People look to different sources depending on a lot of factors, but some of those being like the perceived similarity with the individuals they're communicating with, and how that is one of the things that influences trust and the willingness for people to listen to others, and or the importance or the impact of messaging. And just back to the point of building these teams and having consistent messaging. You know, each group will have their own communication networks where they're likely to be effective in their own audiences that are looking to them for information. Having groups like the volunteer fire departments on board and others that are, you know, just local residents that everybody knows as local residents, they're going to reach a different audience than as agencies we might be able to too. And so just noting that in terms of the effectiveness we can have in communication can certainly be broadened by bringing more people onto that communication team, both through formal but also those informal means. I think you know, Kevin's point of saying like, I have that same impression of like over the gas pump, because that's, you know, like those sorts of informal communications can be hugely effective. And just as somebody raises a point, you've got someone there that has more information they're willing to share. And people are, you know, in some cases more likely to trust that than they are a formal message that comes out because of that established relationship they might have with that person.
That's very interesting. Thank you. We're kind of talking about communications as a general topic right now. And I want to shift focus just a little bit to communication specifically to do in advance of lighting a fire. So we're not talking about response after an incident or so in advance of lighting the fire. I was wondering if you or your agency does prescribed burning. What is your communication strategy before the fire is lit, and is social media involved? And I'll first start with Lee Osterlund's response to this. So again, he's with the Michigan DNR, and he says they use a variety of avenues to get the word out: Facebook, Twitter, department website, others. Their marketing and outreach staff are the ones that do that. Then they give a summary of where, when, and how. Sent from the fire management specialists, and this communication strategy is actually part of their day of fire go, no go checklist. So if they haven't done these communications that they routinely do, they actually won't put fire in the ground. So I thought that was interesting. So that's coming from Michigan DNR. Anyone want to jump in with their agency's protocol? Jess?
Yeah, so what we do on the Huron Manistee is we have InsaWeb. I don't know how many people have heard of that. It's insaweb.nwcg.gov. You could just Google it. I create an incident within InsaWeb, and then we post our prescribed fire updates. For example, this week we've been doing some pile burning at different locations on the east and west zones, the Huron zone being east, Manistee west. The burn bosses send out the information about their burns, and I put that into our Facebook page, pin it to the top, and do updates daily on that. Every morning I will, if I get the information in, I can update it with that. So that's kind of what we do on our end. And we're working there. Obviously there's always room for improvement, and I'm working with Kevin and other members of our leadership team to make ourselves even more nimble and fluid. There's a lot of different ways we can do that better. So we're cognizant of that and working.
And also recognizing too, there's a huge difference between the state government agency of the DNR and the flexibility of what they can and can't do versus the federal agency under USDA. National Forest Service is a whole different entity. So
Absolutely, Laura. That's a very good
Yeah.
point. You know, the state has a lot more leeway and more platforms and communication avenues that they can use. We're really limited with what we can do with being the federal government. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Kevin?
And a lot of our notifications happen at different levels too. So I talk with Josh 3, 4, or 5 days a week, talking about this, making sure we're getting press releases out. He's asking about, project areas that we're looking at, whether it's understory versus pile, to make sure that we're on the same page. And it also happens at the local level of the district zone geographic area. Some of our burn plans have very specific notifications. We have private residents, we have smoke sensitive receptors that have identified that they would like either more advanced notice or they would like a different, notice to it. And so we have that built into each of our plans. And when we go into the spring, we have an idea of what we're looking at implementing. On average, we treat 20 to 25,000 acres a year, aiming for a little bit more, but plus or minus with weather and seasonality. A lot of that on the front end is getting those messages out, hitting up social media and kind of that frequent messaging so that folks get used to it. They know it's coming. We don't want to shock anybody in any way. And then talking to local landowners, talking to cooperators, talking to just people within that area so that as many people as possible are aware of what we're doing. Now, undoubtedly, we never capture everybody. And so we always have the morning of where we do a couple of hot laps around the unit to knock on doors, to answer any questions, any concerns. If folks always have issues with smoke, we try to address that. Or if it's a bad smoke day, we just don't burn. If it's going to impact folks that are concerned, because we have to be good neighbors and good stewards as well. And again, we can't roll in and say, we're big government and we're going to do this. This isn't manifest destiny. We're here trying to do the right thing, but there's a negative aspect to that if we do the right thing and the messaging is wrong. And so trying to balance that so that people are in the know and people can speak to their concerns. Sometimes it's just having somebody stand by their house and talk to them while we're doing it. And sometimes folks want to walk out and, see the fire engines and jump on a dozer and, get a good PR moment, a good selfie or something. But just taking the time to speak to it, and yeah, okay, it sets us back 20 minutes, who cares? But the value in that, I think, goes on, because then that builds that support and the positive messaging, I suppose.
And I believe the local county was talking about tapping into like a reverse 911 system as well for notifications. I don't know if that gained any momentum there, but I know there were some discussions as another way to communicate with local residents.
Can you briefly say what that is? Reverse 911.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's basically a call, a reverse 911 system. So it's a call that goes out. They can draw a circle around an area, and then phone calls go out to the local residents. And I think some of the concerns there are some seasonal folks who may not be in the area, and they would like to be notified that something's going on. And this was a way to do that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, just I think thinking all of these, I totally agree with everything that's been shared, and just want to note, like when we're thinking of communication too, I think it's important to recognize there's communication specific to these events or the things we're planning, and then there's this ongoing communication that may be happening sort of longer term, and they have different goals. And so like the longer term communication is like building understanding of the rationale for the use of fire and how it's managed, and what the ecological benefits are. And both are hugely important. And again, both are ongoing, but just to recognize, we've got different types of messages we're trying to communicate. And in some cases, that might mean we need to use different methods for those, right? There's different approaches to use for each of those, but that they're both really important. And I think having that sort of ongoing communication, that ultimately, the longer term sort of goals and outcomes we want to emerge from that in terms of increasing understanding of fire, increasing trust with local communities, and then those specific events, that we absolutely are trying to just get that word out about, like, this is happening, this is why. There's links to it, and then you can also link back to that sort of those broader messages so people can find more information too.
So we've just got about 4 minutes left for this panel session. I want to check in with Amy and see if I haven't been watching the chat too closely. I know there's some really good discussion going on there. Are there any questions that we should address before we close?
I don't think so. In the interest of the flow of this conversation, there are some good questions. They're pretty general though. If people want to know the answers to them, they might find that in the facilitated learning analysis, which I will put the link to again in the chat. But otherwise, yeah, the conversations are just really good. A lot of people going back and forth with good points. So I would say go ahead and ask maybe one final question.
Okay, great. I think I kind of want to leave it up to you to just give you a chance for your parting thoughts or parting comments on whatever topic you think. And if you don't have something, I could come up with a question, but let's just see if you guys have kind of parting thoughts.
I've got one. I was hoping to kind of weave this in. So, after the fire, we had I'm going to call it a quote unquote a public meeting, right? So we, it was about 5 days after the event, and there was a little bit of hesitation to do that. And I would highly recommend hosting a meeting of some sort with impacted community members. I know it's scary, but you got to do it. You got to rip that Band-Aid off. And instead of just kind of a little tip I wanted you guys to be aware of is we didn't call it a public meeting, because a public meeting is a way to invite opinions, right? So we really tried to control the narrative as best we could. And what we called this public meeting was, after the fire, a virtual learning opportunity. And I know that sounds very cliche, right? But really, all we had was the facts that we had on hand, and we tried to stick with that. And the other thing that we did was in that virtual learning opportunity, we had a fire behavior analyst showcase what happened on that fire, and really took some aerial shots and showed the different fingers, because people had this perception that everything was black, right? Everything was burned down. It was Armageddon, right? And that wasn't the case. So that was another way to kind of weave in some of the positive things that occurred, was to put out some of those misconceptions of all the bad stuff that happened, right? But here's what it looks like. So, don't panic. It's not as bad as you think, because when they would drive around, a lot of the roads were along these really charred areas. So that helped kind of, I put some of the public at ease. So highly recommend doing that public meeting. It's scary. Find your charmer who's willing to represent your agency, own it, talk about it, and try to weave in some of those silver linings. So I'll end on that.
Thank you, Catherine. Anyone else want to jump in?
I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be on the panel. Thank the Prescribed Fire Council for having us today. And, you know, we're a learning organization, and we're going to continue to learn. We're going to take some feedback, good and bad, and look forward to moving forward into the future, to our brave new world of, you know, keeping things going, restoring the landscape, and working with our partners. So appreciate the grace and patience of everybody as we work together to achieve our goals. So thank you.
Kevin?
I agree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go
I
ahead,
agree.
Kevin.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I always worry that I'm muted. I'm like solving all of the universal problems on mute, but thank you again. You know, like I said, it's not a super comfortable topic, you know, but I do think it's important for the group as a whole to learn from it and to work together and just stay the course, man. Stay curious. Listening to some of the stuff that talked about yesterday with seasonality and severity and intensity. That's all awesome. It's all awesome. There's no set in stone way to fire a unit. There's no set in stone timeline to unit. There's no set in stone really anything. And it's kind of the voyage of discovery. Be careful with it, you know, obviously, but you know, this is a great tool for treating the landscape and ecological benefits, everything that we've talked about already. So don't get spooked, stay the course, do the right thing for the right reasons. And thank you again for having us.
Eric, you want the last word?
I don't feel like I deserve the last word, but I guess for my last word, I will just note, again, well, two things. One, just really and just I'm so grateful for folks being willing to share about this. I think this is a really important conversation to have, and not the easiest conversation to have at all. And so really just, I think folks are to be lauded for being willing to come forward with this. I would definitely direct folks who have more interest into that learning analysis. I just reviewed it and I'm just really impressed with everything that was shared there too. The one other sort of quick thing I'll just share, there isn't a lot of research that looks at sort of attitudes like where we have a way of sort of testing what the response is post in a situation like this, so following an escape prescribed fire. But there was a project, though. There's only one that I'm actually aware of that's published in the literature that looks at this. And I was part of a team that did some work in the early 2000s, and then there was a prescribed fire that escaped in that same sort of region 2 years later. And a portion of the team, this was out in Utah, so a portion of the team from Utah State did a quick follow-up with residents that were near where the escaped burn had happened. And I'll just note, like, I think absolutely what we talked about here, there's so many things to take from this, but I think another thing is, you know, the long-lasting impacts may not be as in terms of the community response and negative responses we might see, may not be as long-lasting as we might expect. And in this case, just 2 months after the fire, so similarly, a lot of initial public outcry. It was sort of pre-social media being what it is, so it was maybe less visible there, but news media, local government officials were really critical of the event. But overall, the participants in the survey were much less negative afterwards than might have been expected based on the public response. There was definitely a little more hesitation and a little more concern about the use of fire, which I think just points to the fact of sort of going slowly and sort of building up that trust and working on that resilience. But when they were asked like the same questions about their acceptance of the use of fire before and after, it actually hadn't changed. So you look at the pre and post responses there, and they were the same, which is kind of amazing. There was no real statistical change there. And again, there was where the changes happened were things like on trust and a little bit of heightened concern. But I think that really points to the resilience of understanding and the resilience of relationships that can be developed. And again, noting, I think that the team is doing a phenomenal job at those things, was before the fire and is in the response afterwards too. So yeah, just note that. And thanks again, everyone, for letting me join you and participate.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Kevin, Josh, and Catherine as well. This has been a really interesting discussion. I hope everyone's gotten something out of it. I am gonna also drop in the chat here contact information for Lee Osterlund with the Michigan DNR in case anybody wants to reach out to him to learn more about his perspective and his experience with the Brittle Fire and his insights. And with that, looks like we are scheduled for a break right now. It was scheduled to go till 10:40, but I still want to get a nice 10-minute break so everybody can take care of their needs. So we will come back at 10:45 for the rest of the day's programming. So thank you again, panelists, and we will see everybody back here at 10:45.
On the my name is Andy Vanderyacht. I'm the current chair of the Michigan Prescribed Fire Council and faculty in the forestry department at Michigan State University, where I teach and do research. And I am moderating the second session today that we have organized around the Michigan Certified Burn Manager Program. So we're switching gears a little bit. I think that there are probably some topics related that we can discuss centered around, there's some overlap here, but yeah, we are definitely transitioning topics and want to talk about this Certified Burn Manager Program that was legislated a while ago, but has yet to be fully implemented, and we'll talk about that. So first up, as part of this, we would like to turn things over to Glenn Palmgren of the Michigan DNR, who will give us kind of the past, present, and future of that program from his perspectives within the DNR. So first of all, Glenn Palmgren is a fire management specialist with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, the Forest Resources Division. In this role, Glenn serves as the DNR's statewide coordinator for the Prescribed Burn Program, fire training, and interagency dispatch. He has been in this position since 2019 and has been a qualified prescribed burn boss, or an RXB2, since 2013, and has been working with the DNR and involved in wildland fire for 22 years. So we are very excited to have Glenn here and share this information with us. And without further ado, I will turn things over to Glenn.
All right, thanks, Andy. Is everybody able to see my screen? I think I'm sharing it.
You look great.
All right, great.
The screen looks great as well.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, well, as Andy said, I'm Glenn Palmgren with the Michigan DNR, Forest Resources Division. And I'm going to talk about Michigan's Certified Prescribed Burn Manager Program. It's an interesting topic and a little bit of a difficult topic to talk about because it's a program that exists in law, but it hasn't really been implemented. So I think Andy's alluded to that already. So my presentation is, I don't have tons of pretty pictures and discussion about how it's working because it's not yet. So I'm going to talk mostly about what the program is. Essentially, we have like a skeleton of a program in Michigan that's there in statute, and I'm going to talk about that. So what do we have? When did we get it? And where do we go next? Is kind of my outline. So, all right. So just the kind of the brief history of the program when it started. A law was passed in, it actually passed in 2004, went into effect in January of 2005, that amended Michigan's forest fire statute, which it's labeled there, Part 515, Public Act 451. But that was amended effective January 2005. And it basically amended it to add a bunch of components to that statute to talk about prescribed burning and certified burn managers in Michigan. So, and as part of that as well, there was a direction in that statute for the Department of Natural Resources to develop more specific administrative rules as to how this program would function in the state. So the law was passed, went into effect January 2005, and then starting as soon as the law was passed, DNR started working on those administrative rules. They were developed in 2005. They went through a whole long process of public and legislative review during 2006, and then they became effective in February of 2007. So anybody who's been through the rulemaking process in state government, it takes a long time. So that's about as fast as those things move. So we do have both a law on the books that basically says there is a program and provides a little bit of detail. And then we have those administrative rules that were created to kind of provide structure to that program. All right, so the Certified Burn Manager program, unfortunately, has never really been funded. So it was put into statute and said that this program exists. And it basically said that DNR can do a bunch of different things and people can become certified as burn managers and all this stuff. But then it never really provided a way for DNR to actually make that happen by providing funding for us to actually spend time doing it. So as a lot of people know who have either worked with state government or in it before, we can only do what our funding allows us to do, essentially. And we have a lot of restricted funds within the Department of Natural Resources that essentially are allocated for very specific jobs. So we can spend our time on those things that we have funding for, and this was not really one of them. So we've kind of talked about it, we've picked away at it, we've done a little behind the scenes work, just bits and pieces as we can, but we haven't really had the ability to really dive into this program and spend a lot of dedicated staff time on it to actually get it up and running, unfortunately. So the law is in place, the administrative rules are in place, they've been in place for a long time now, but we just haven't had that ability to get the program up and running because of that. So getting into the law and the administrative rules and stuff, what does it really mean? What is a certified prescribed burn manager? I'll use that acronym throughout the presentation here, CPBM. So what is a certified prescribed burn manager? So as it's defined in our state statute, it's someone who applies for and receives certification by the DNR. It's a state level certification. So it doesn't give you any rights or any privileges in any other state. Other states do have certified burn manager programs as well. I know Ohio does. I know a lot of other states do as well. So those programs do exist, but every state does a little differently. So every state's program is administered a little differently. How you become certified, what the requirements are, what it means when you are certified is a little bit different as you go from state to state around the country. So, so this would be a certified burn manager in Michigan. It's not an NWCG qualification. I know there's probably a few people on here that on the presentation here that don't know what that is, but for those who do, the National Wildfire Coordinating Group provides kind of national level standards where federal agencies, state agencies, and others have kind of gotten together to decide what are kind of the minimum standards for different types of fire type positions on the ground, whether it's wildfire or prescribed fire. So those kind of national standards exist, but the Certified Burn Manager program is not to be confused with that. It's not an NWCG qualification, and it doesn't require that you have any previous NWCG qualifications. So it's completely separate from that program. I'll get into a little bit more. Some of the NWCG training classes that have been put on are required to become certified in Michigan under this program, but I'll get into that in a little bit. You don't have to have any previous qualifications though under NWCG. The program is, I already mentioned, it's only valid in Michigan, and someone certified under another state's program, like for example, if you were certified burn manager or whatever they call that in Ohio, you could also apply to Michigan's program for certification as well. There's in the administrative rules, there's a process for it's sort of an expedited or a little bit different flow for people who are certified in other states. You may not have to jump through all the hoops that someone that hasn't been certified before would have to do. There's some basically reciprocity type things built in, but you would still have to apply and you would still have to get your certification in Michigan. Just by being certified in another state doesn't make you automatically certified under Michigan's program. So that's what it is. So why would anybody ever want to do this? Why would you want to become a certified prescribed burn manager in Michigan? There's two, I mean, you can probably come up with other ideas and maybe there's other things I'm not thinking of too, but there's two main things that come to mind. And I think we're probably the main intent of getting it in place to begin with. One is that it does provide extra liability protection for you under Michigan state law. Basically, we'll get into some of the details in a little bit here, but basically under state law, if you are a certified prescribed burn manager and you follow all the different things that I'll get into in a minute here, if you follow all those processes, then somebody basically cannot find you. Basically, your smoke is not considered to be a nuisance under state law, and you also and basically can't you can't have injury on somebody else or whatever. It's kind of hard to describe, but basically, you're not liable for damages caused by your fire or your smoke as long as you fall within a certain set of conditions that I'll get into in a minute. So, and that liability standard basically is gross negligence. So, which is basically the least amount of liability that you can have with something, where you have to be basically proven to be completely reckless, that no reasonable person in the right mind would ever do something like that. The gross negligence is a really high bar to try to prove that somebody has in order to be found liable for damages caused by a prescribed burn. So as long as you are operating within the program, then you would have to be found grossly negligent to be able to be liable for anything that your burn does. So I'll get into some of those details in a minute, but that liability protection, we have a strong feeling anyway that it may lower people's insurance premiums. So people, contractors or private people who want to do prescribed burning that want to get insurance, you may have lower premiums, or you may just have an easier time getting insurance if the insurance company knows that you would have to be found grossly negligent in court in order to actually be found liable for something that your burn does. So I think that's a big incentive for people to be certified, is that you would be subject to that much higher standard of liability if something were to happen. Also, I think the Certified Burn Manager program would provide some recognition for people that might be helpful for consultants to be able to say, hey, I'm a certified prescribed burn manager. And that's like another qualification that you can come forth with and say, hey, this gives me some level of standing, that I've met a certain level of qualifications. I've met a certain standard of training and experience in order to get this title in Michigan. So that may be a good thing for advertising to your clients, that sort of thing. It may also help to reassure local fire departments that you have at least some level of training, whereas just some random person who wants to do a prescribed burn on their property versus somebody who's a certified prescribed burn manager, been certified by the DNR on that, then that may reassure people that you know a little bit more about what you're doing, possibly. It also could be used, on the other hand, for individuals or companies or government agencies, let's say, that wanted to contract out prescribed burning, that they may put that in as a qualification requirement, that we're only going to allow certified prescribed burn managers to do these burns on our property, whoever that might be. So it could be used in that matter. It's nothing in the law says it has to be, but these are just some areas where it could be a helpful thing. So the liability protection and then that sort of recognition or that title might be something that would be helpful for people going forward. So how do you become a certified prescribed burn manager in Michigan? Unfortunately, the short answer right now is you don't. But going forward, once the program is up and running, essentially the process that's outlined in the state administrative rules is that you have to apply for certification to DNR. You have to have 3 prerequisite training courses from NWCG. You have to have your S-130, which is basic firefighter training, S-190, which is your basic level fire behavior training, and S-290, which is the next level up of fire behavior training. So those courses do have to be completed as a prerequisite before you can apply to become a certified burn manager in Michigan. And also you have to take the Michigan DNR Certified Prescribed Burn Manager class, which doesn't exist yet, but that class is actually outlined in the administrative rules, that you have to actually take that class and pass it as a prerequisite as well. So the class, there's been some work done behind the scenes to start developing that class, and there is kind of a structure and outline for it already, but we would definitely there's some more work that needs to be done within DNR to try to develop the rest of that class out and flesh it out. So besides that training, you also have to have experience on at least 5 prescribed burns. So, and you have to have proof of that somehow. So whether it's some documentation signed by a burn boss that, yes, you participated on these burns, or whether you have some other kind of documentation, exactly how you provide that proof, that's one of the little details that we have to try to work out among many others. But somehow you have to provide proof that you have experience on at least 5 prescribed burns before you can become certified. You also have to go through, we have to verify that you haven't been convicted of arson. So if you're an arsonist in Michigan, that is written into the statute that you cannot become a certified prescribed burn manager, which makes sense. So we have to kind of verify that as well. Once you become certified, if you've met all those requirements and you become certified, your certification is valid for 5 years. And then you'd have to apply for recertification. And when you apply for recertification, you either have to do 8 hours of essentially continuous education on prescribed fire, 8 hours of training during the course of those 5 years, or you have to attend a minimum of 1 Michigan Prescribed Fire Council meeting, so like we're doing right here. So that's what's written into the administrative rules in order to become recertified. You either have to continue your training through some classes or through attending the meeting. And you also have to provide proof that you've worked on anywhere from 2 to 5 burns. 2 to 5, if you just participate on the burns, it's 5. If you actually document that you actually ran a burn as a certified prescribed burn manager, and you can provide, the actual date and the documentation for that specific burn that you did as a certified burn manager, then you would only have to do 2 of those within the 5 years. Lots of details and stuff here, but that's kind of what you'd have to go through to become certified and then to recertify every 5 years. All right. So there is also a process built in for decertification. Let's hope nothing happens like on the picture on the slide here as you're going through doing your prescribed burns. But the ways that you can become decertified if something goes wrong, if you violate state law or state administrative rules in the process of doing your prescribed burn, that in itself is enough to take away your certification and decertify you. Also, if you are found to pose a threat to public health or safety or public property or private property, then you can also have your certification taken away for that reason as well. Also, if you're convicted of arson, you can have your certification taken away. And then the fourth thing that's defined that you can have it taken away is for a series of violations. So I'm going to talk about what those are, but essentially if you do some things wrong in your burn, some things go bad on your burn, you can be cited for certain violations on those burns, and each violation is worth a certain number of points. And if you accumulate a certain number of points, then you can become decertified as well. So a key thing with decertification is you get 1 second chance, basically. So if you do become decertified for any of those reasons above, then you have to be decertified for basically a whole year, and then you can reapply again to become certified again after a year's time. But you can only do that once. If you are then decertified again a second time, then you're essentially done for life. So you only get 2 shots at the program. So that point system for violations, it's a bunch of details here. I don't need to go through every single one, but the key thing is that there are certain things that you can do that are considered really, really bad. And there are other things that are bad, but not as bad. So, and you can be assessed points essentially for each of these individual bullets on the screen here. And these are defined in that administrative rule package. So the 2 worst things you can do is not have a permit for your burn. So you do still have to get burn permits. I'll go into that in a minute here. But if you don't get a burn permit and you do a prescribed burn anyway, that's 15 points immediately. If you do get a burn permit, but you get it by lying to the local fire department or the DNR in the process of doing it, you provide false information, that's also 15 points. So those are considered the most serious offenses. There's a few 10-point offenses on there. Your burn gets away and causes damage or causes injury to somebody. That's 10 points. If you burn outside your prescription, you have to have a written prescription for your burn. And if you burn outside of that prescription, that's a 10-point assessment. You don't have the equipment or the people that are specified in your plan. You can get points for that. Or if you fail to mitigate or screen your smoke in a reasonable way, you can get points for that as well. So I won't go through the rest of them, but there's a bunch of other 5-point offenses as well. The key thing there is if you accumulate more than 15 points over the course of 2 years, then that's enough to get you decertified. So these are the things you got to watch out, make sure that you don't do if you are a certified burn manager and running your burns. So there's a little leeway if a couple of minor things happen, maybe once or twice, you'll be okay. But if these things happen repeatedly, or if some of the really bad things happen combined with something smaller, you can have your certification taken away. I want to come back to that liability protection, prescribed burning. If you follow all the things that I'll lay out here under the statute, and the big if is in red there. So if you do all the things I'm about to mention, then prescribed burning is not by definition considered a public or private nuisance under state law. And also, if you do all these things to follow, then the property owner or the agent, meaning the certified prescribed burn manager could be their agent, is not liable for damage or injury caused by their fire or their smoke. So those 2 things, that's your big hook for liability protection there, is as long as you do all the things you're supposed to do, prescribed burning is not a public or private nuisance under the law, so nobody can claim that you created a public or private nuisance. And the property owner or agent is not liable for damage or injury caused by fire or smoke. So the big qualification here is what are those things you have to do to achieve those two bullets. First of all, the landowner has to have agreed to let you burn on their property. That seems kind of obvious, but you do have to have landowner consent. You do have to have a burn permit from state or local government. I'll get into that in a second. You do have to have adequate fuel breaks. You have to have adequate personnel and adequate equipment to control the fire. You also have to have a certified prescribed burn manager present on the burn. You have to have no damage that results from your fire escaping. So let's say your fire does escape. If it doesn't cause any damage, then you're still okay within this statute. So also the property owner or agent, meaning the certified burn manager or the property owner, are not grossly negligent. So if you were just completely crazy, wacky out there, grossly negligent in the way you do your burn, or if you landowner hasn't consented, you haven't gotten a permit, you don't have adequate fuel breaks, personnel, and equipment, or a certified burn manager is not present, then you lose that gross liability and gross negligence protection. And all that goes out the window, and you're essentially back to our status quo in Michigan, which is that you could be found liable for any damage. This liability protection does not apply to the injury or death of someone actually doing the burn. So let's say you have a crew of 10 people doing your burn and somebody gets hurt on your crew and they try to sue you, or they try to say that you were negligent in the way you did the burn. The law does not protect you in that case. You could be found liable for that. So that gross negligence standard is only to injury or damage to outside the burn. So as part of this statute, Michigan, I put it in quotes because it's up for interpretation a little bit, and I think some of this probably needs to be tested in courts at some point in time. But here's what the statute actually says: that this part, meaning the prescribed burn, the forest fire law essentially, and the prescribed burn part of that, does not preempt local ordinances or regulations, except to the extent that those regulations conflict with the exemption from liability for or otherwise apply to either of the following: prescribed burns connected to compliance with everything I just talked about, basically, or prescribed burns conducted by state or federal agencies on lands they control. So what this essentially says, it's almost like a double negative or a triple negative in the statement here, but essentially says that local government ordinances can't be passed to essentially stop you from doing prescribed burning. As long as you're doing it lawfully under this statute and you are doing it under the certified burn manager part of the statute, then essentially those local ordinances can't, they can't essentially pass a rule in a local government that says we don't allow prescribed burning in our area. So they do have the ability. I don't know if they could necessarily deny you a permit completely, but you still do have to get a burn permit from that local fire chief or the local fire department or whoever it happens to be. So you still have to go through that process. So there may be some leverage that they have on that end, but they can't just pass an ordinance saying you can't do prescribed burning in our township at all. So there is some level of a right to burn in that sense. That the state law says that that you can do prescribed burning as long as you're following everything under the statute, and local governments can't, negate that essentially. So, like I said, it's probably, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. There's probably some room for interpretation in there, and what that means exactly, I think, is yet to be determined as it starts to play out. So I mentioned a few times you do still have to get a burn permit in order to conduct a burn as a certified prescribed burn manager. So, and a reminder that under Michigan's forest fire statute, even right now, as it stands today, even if you're not a certified burn manager, prescribed burning specifically under statute always requires a burn permit, even when there's snow on the ground. So a lot of people say, well, under the Michigan's open burning law, which is, and it's true, that general open burning on your property, as long as you're doing it legally, you don't have to get a burn permit if there's snow cover on the ground. Like right now in southern Michigan, we're getting our little snowstorm right now. You wouldn't have to get a burn permit for open burning outside, but the exception is prescribed burning. Prescribed burning always requires a burn permit, even when there's snow on the ground. So that's something a little different that a lot of people don't realize. And that's under the current statute, whether you're certified or not, that's the case. So you do have to get, as a certified burn manager, you're responsible for obtaining verification from that issuing authority that you do have a burn permit. And you have to make a copy of your prescription or your burn plan essentially available to that issuing authority upon their request. So if they don't ask for it, you don't have to give it to them, but if they do request it, you have to be able to provide that. I put the website up here, and I think it's probably going to show up in the chat there that there's a burn permit website for Michigan DNR. I encourage everybody to go to this and check it out sometime. That burn permit website is how you basically tells you how to get a burn permit from DNR, but it also provides you information on local government as well. So I'll go to the next slide here. This is just a screenshot of the burn permit system. You'll notice on the map there of Michigan, I just grabbed this a couple days ago off the website, but all the counties in gray in the southern part of Michigan, if it's a gray colored county in southern Michigan, then you always have to get your burn permit from your local unit of government. So usually it's the fire chief or fire department, but whatever your local unit of government decides, they regulate burning in those townships or in those counties. In the green counties, DNR issues burn permits for any of those counties in green. And the ones in orange on there are ones where it's kind of a mix. It's in most cases, it's mostly DNR in most of those counties, but there might be some townships. I pulled out Clare County just as a random example there, where it looks like Surrey Township burn permits are issued locally by the township, but all the other townships in that county, DNR handles permitting. So that's a good map to reference if you're jumping around the state doing burns in different areas, or if you just want to know your local area. This might be good for contractors and stuff too. A lot of them probably already know this, but that's how you find out in Michigan who issues your burn permits, whether it's DNR or local unit of government. Okay, so also as a certified prescriber manager, you're responsible, like I mentioned earlier, for having a burn prescription, and you have to be able to provide that upon request to whoever gives you your permit. That burn prescription under the administrative rules has to contain a certain list of things. And these are pretty standard things that you would find in a burn plan. So anybody that's written a prescribed burn plan before, these shouldn't be too out of the ordinary. But you have to have a description of the site that you're burning. You have to know the size of it. How many acres is it? You have to have a map of some kind that shows the burn site and shows any special concerns in that burn site. Maybe there's power lines nearby. Maybe there's a smoke sensitive area nearby or something like that. You have to have a map or some maps that show that sort of thing. You have to have a list of the personnel and equipment that are required to do that burn, kind of the minimum standards. You have to have management objectives outlined for that burn. Why are you doing it? What objectives are you trying to meet? You have to describe the vegetation type that you're burning, or the fuel model, however you want to describe that. But in some way, you have to describe the fuel that you're burning. And also, you have to quantify the amount of fuel to be consumed as well. That's required. I got a couple slides here. There's a few of these. Again, all of those in a typical burn plan. Most people have these in there already. There might be a few things you'd have to add to your template if you've done burning before to make sure you're meeting these requirements. But you have to have an operational plan of what you're going to do. How are you going to burn this unit? What are you going to do? Where are you going to start your ignition? How are you going to make this happen? Who's going to do what? That sort of a thing. You have to have a contingency plan that's actually outlined in writing. What are you going to do if something goes wrong? You have to have a contact list of what people or agencies are going to be contacted before the burn. And then also, as part of your contingency plan, who are the contacts you're going to make if something does go wrong as well. You have to have the weather parameters for your prescription outlined. So what are the minimum, maximum ranges of conditions you can have to do this burn? You have to describe your expected fire behavior, and then just the date you prepared that prescription, the smoke impacts. So you have to actually describe where you expect your smoke to go and how you're going to mitigate that smoke. And if you think it's going to go downwind if there's a subdivision nearby, if there's a hospital nearby, some concern, smoke sensitive receptor nearby, you have to describe how you're going to mitigate and make sure that your smoke isn't going to impact that. You have to describe a go, no-go decision criteria, like a checklist, basically, of what are the things you're going to make sure to check before you actually proceed with your burn. And you have to have the signature and certification number of a burn manager on that plan, and then you have to have the landowner's signature on that plan as well. So all of those things have to be included in your plan. If your plan is missing any of those things, then it's not considered a valid prescribed burn plan or valid prescription under the statute. All right. So I know it's a lot of kind of technical stuff and details and everything, but that's kind of what I think the point was today is for me to just give you the baseline of where do we stand today? What does the law say? What is this program? What's in place right now? And then we can kind of from here then talk about where we're going to go from here and how do we actually get this program up and running in Michigan? Where are we going to go? When is it going to happen? All that kind of stuff. So which is probably the big question that a lot of people have. So I can tell you right now that that DNR is the Forest Resource Division and DNR as a whole. We are actively pursuing funding right now to fund this program, to get it up and running. We're going through a couple different avenues to work on that, but we are trying to get some funding for that. We know there's going to be a greater upfront cost and staff time to actually get it up and running to kind of, we have to, everything as simple as just making the application forms to, to the database. I have a list on here of just a few things we're thinking about. How do we track who's certified and who's not, and who has their, 8 hours of training and who's attended the Prescribed Fire Council workshop to get recertified and all those sorts of things. How do we track, how many burns each person's done for whether they meet that minimum requirement? We have to finish developing that certified burn manager class, that training class, to get that up and running. We're going to have some kind of either a DNR or a division type of a policy or procedure as to how internally we actually process this stuff. Who accepts the applications? When do we accept them? And who actually makes decisions? Who reviews these things? Just a kind of a who does what within DNR of how do we actually run this thing? And then how do we, I think I've already mentioned that before, tracking, documenting experience, that sort of thing. Also the whole complaint system. So if somebody is out there and burning and the burn escapes, that's a 5-point deduction under the rule, but how do we know that happens? If nobody from DNR is on site, then how does DNR ever know that burn escaped? So how do we develop that reporting process? We're probably going to have some kind of like a form where anybody from the public or somebody can report, fire departments can report it. So some kind of reporting mechanism for violations and issues. So that's yet to be determined and needs to be fleshed out too. So all that kind of stuff, there's going to be a little bit of upfront work to get all that done. And then once that's done, then we can actually kind of get up and rolling. Our thought is that once the program's up and rolling, it's mostly just kind of keeping the database up to date. We're going to have kind of people with some time to actually review new applications and some people with time to review any complaints or violations that we get on the back end. So that's the main thing, is just certifying new people, running that class every so often, however often it needs to be done, and then going through that decertification process. Hopefully we don't have to ever do that, but if we did, we'd have to kind of have that lined up as well. So those are kind of the things we have to get up and running, and then once the program's up and running, hopefully it takes much less staff time and it's a lot smoother and doesn't take a ton of funding to keep it running long term. So that is, I believe, all I have to get us started. I think a lot more will come out in the panel discussion. All right, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Glenn. I would like to note as we start here, we're just slightly behind schedule, but we will make up that time, just shave a little bit off the panel. So letting everyone know that is where we stand, and we'll be getting out here on time. Also, I wanted to note that as Glenn was speaking, I was sharing some resources that he provided to me that went along with his presentation. So do not want to appear like I'm taking credit for that. He gave me that information and I shared that in the chat. So draw your attention to that specifically. And then as I'd like all of our panel members to activate their video and pop up here, and we'll have our behind the scenes gurus spotlight us all. So we're settled in for our panel discussion. And as we transition into that, we poll question, another one that is specific to this session that we would love everyone's participation in. So if we can get that pulled up, we will use that to transition into the panel discussion. I believe. There we go. Cool. So on your screen, there is one question with several answers. And if you could fill that out, would be appreciative, and we'll kind of set the stage for this this panel discussion. So as we're allowing a little bit of time for that poll to be filled out, I would like to note that we have 5 people on our panel, and we'll get some specific introductions to all of them in the beginning of this as we move forward. So I see the poll is kind of slowed down, so I will share those results. And it looks like, thinking about in your opinion, so specifically to the Prescribed Fire Council that was gathered here today, what the greatest benefit of a fully implemented certified burn manager program would be in Michigan. Looks like we've got a pretty tight split, with the most popular answer being training related increases in prescribed fire safety and efficiency in meeting objectives surrounding that. And then also an expanded use of prescribed fire on private land. So getting more acres burned on private land seems to be the top 2 answers. And I will also note that it seems that nearly everyone is aware of this program, and that poor one soul that was not aware. Luckily for you, the poll results are anonymous. But yes, thanks for that setting of the stage. I will stop sharing those results and then launch in. So we've already met Glenn Palmgren, and he is basically the current lead contact. Will provide that perspective from within the agency on the program, and so we're happy to have him as a part of the panel. I'd like to introduce Don Johnson, who is of the Michigan DNR and retired, and allow him to share his an introduction to his background.
Good morning. Yes, I was in Glenn's position as the state fire management specialist from 2003 till I retired at the end of 2015. And then prior to that, for 13 years, I was the state fire prevention specialist. So I had 27 years in the fire program in Michigan. And on that time, I was a burn boss type 4 IC and probably participated in 150 or so burns over those years. So it's good to see everybody this morning.
Thanks, Don. And yeah, I guess I'm noting in the chat that I've got some white noise in my background. I'm not entirely certain what that is. My laptop's fan is running, so that might be it. I apologize for that. But next up, I'd like to introduce Steve Woods. Steve is of the Huron Pines organization, and he's their conservation stewardship director. So Steve, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I have been with Huron Pines for about 3 years now, and before that worked with the Nature Conservancy for about 17 years. I was RXB2 burn boss and was fire manager for Ohio and Michigan for several years. So did a lot of collaborating with other land trusts or NGOs and government agencies on fire. Been involved in the Fire Council on and off for about 17 years as well, and probably participated in a little over 400 prescribed fires. About half of those I led.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. So some NGO perspective on the panel. We have David Mindell, owner, Chief Executive Officer of PlantWise LLC.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. So PlantWise is a company based in Ann Arbor. We do all manners of ecological restoration, and obviously prescribed burning is a key component of that. I've been burning for about 27 years, all told, and we burn anywhere between kind of 70 and 90 burns during a burn year. We cover about 1,500 acres in course of completing those burns. I've done about 1,000, well over 1,000 burns. And our burns tend to be on a mix of private lands, corporate, municipal properties. It average probably about 20 acres each.
Awesome. Thanks, David. The perspectives of burn contractors actively engaged in prescribed fire is David's role on the panel. And last but not least, James Gray, of Natural Capital Forestry.
Thank you for the introduction and welcome, Andy. So yeah, I'm here because I've never done any controlled burns whatsoever, but I would love to. And I'm a consulting forester based in East Lansing, kind of working in the southern lower. And anyway, Andy and I have been in discussion about a number of things, and I realized that Michigan Works had some funding for training, and I thought, what would be the very coolest thing to do with that money? And so I said to Andy, and then a lot of you probably know Mike Smolligan, we're like, well, how could we make this happen to get more consulting foresters involved in prescribed burning? And so we've been in discussions, and so in my forest stewardship plans, I discuss fire. My clients are just fascinated by it, most of them, but it's kind of at this point just fantasy, and so I'd like to turn that into reality. And kind of I see Hunter Fodor's here and some other foresters, and one of our big challenges is oak regeneration, and so I'd really like to apply it to that important purpose.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much, James. So the perspective of some environmental consultants that perhaps are not actively engaged in prescribed fire, but perhaps how the Certified Burn Manager program might change some of those perspectives. We'll be drawing on James's experience in answering that question. So to kind of start, I would like to go through some kind of organized, pre-thought out questions to steer the panel in discussing some of this. And then we will get right into more live submitted question and answers. And I've already seen several come in. So we will get to those shortly after we run through this exercise. But I'd like to start off with Don. Is there anything after viewing Glenn's presentation, and I know that you've had some communications with him too, about the historical perspectives of this program that you'd like to share? Just so that everyone has that, given that Glenn is relatively a young whippersnapper when it comes to this. And, is there anything else that you wanted to add to the context of this discussion?
Well, I would just add kind of the period of time that this all took place. The change in the statute happened in 2004. I and a group within the division wrote the rules in 05 and 06. During that time, between 2000 and 2010, the fire program lost 30% of its workforce. And by that, I mean, the fire staff in the field. And also during that time, our funding switched from 75% general fund and 25% money from the sale of timber on state-owned lands to just the opposite. It became 75% timber sale receipts and 25% general fund. So every year during that time, we were taking budget cuts in the fire program year after year. As people retired or left, we were unable to replace them. And so it's against that backdrop that the decision was made not to implement the program. The other thing to keep in mind is with the way the legislature works, and this is not meant to cast dispersions, but if you implement a program without funding and you do that for 2 or 3 years, you'd better be prepared to do it forever, because what will come back is, well, you're doing it now without funding. What do you need funding for? So, that was part of the decision-making process in terms of, do we want to take this on? I think the other piece was, at that point in time, we had no idea what the workload would be. I'm sorry for that in the background. So we didn't know if we were going to be talking about 10 people per year or 110 people per year, or just what that was going to be. We didn't know what we needed to prepare for. And so at that point, the decision was basically made, well, we're not going to implement it. And then I think it just kind of fell into the background, and it's been changes nationally and with other states that has kind of brought that back into the focus, and Glenn could probably provide more background than I could.
And over that time, the reduction in staffing and resources and things like that, but your general sense of approval within the agency for this type of program over that time.
I mean, it was never a fact. There was never a problem that the division didn't support the concept. It was more along the lines of, can we chew what we're biting off?
Excellent. Awesome. So yeah, from that, I'd like to transition to Steve and throw a question your way. What do you feel this active implementation of the Certified Burn Manager Program here in Michigan would mean for organizations, your specific organization here on Pines, maybe similar organizations and NGOs engaged in fire management across the state, as well as just the environmental mission of those organizations?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I think to start, just saying that, a lot of NGOs, including here on Pines, provide technical assistance on resource management issues to lots of other landowners. And fire has been a really important tool in that land management toolbox that most NGOs aren't currently able to navigate. And from sort of the big picture perspective, there's this interesting paradox where everybody recognizes that fire is a really important ecological process and the benefits of using fire as a land management tool, yet very few organizations have been able to effectively use it to manage their land. And I think, the lack of the state certification is a big part of that, because you effectively either have the NWCG qualifications, which are really unattainable for most private NGOs, or you have nothing, which makes it really difficult to get insurance, sort of make up your own qualifications and then try to get insurance. So from that perspective, I think it would be a big deal. And it would suddenly bring in reach, meeting some sort of standard that people can point to and have an understanding of what they need to do to be able to implement prescribed fires. And so it's, NGO lands, it's also the private landowners that we work with. I think that, without it, you also end up with this chicken and egg kind of thing where nobody's really working on fire in the NGO world. So nobody's really training on fire. So nobody's really able to talk about it and represent fire within those organizations. And you end up with just a vacuum of information and experience with the tool.
Awesome. And I made one of my classic mistakes of giving you a multi-part question that then the answer, sometimes if you get parts of it, but I would like to draw you back to, maybe just like your general mission within Huron Pines and the general mission of a lot of environmental related NGOs, and how you could see potential benefits in achieving that mission from this program being implemented, and perhaps not even chased by people within your own organization or NGOs in general, but like across the state and that makes sense.
Yeah, well, so the mission of Huron Pines is to conserve the natural resources of northern Michigan, and I think that's consistent with how a lot of land conservancies as well, even conservation districts and things like that have very similar missions. And in Michigan, we tend to focus on threatened and endangered species and natural communities, the highest quality habitats, and we kind of put ourselves deliberately in a position to be stewards of those resources. We say, here's where, the best fen or the best prairie is, and so we're going to acquire that and then manage it. And without fire, you really can't effectively do that a lot of times. A lot of those, our rarest communities and species are fire dependent communities and species. So we kind of are in a position without the ability to use fire that we honestly, in some ways, can't fulfill our mission. It's really, really difficult, if not impossible, definitely inefficient to try to maintain fire adapted communities without fire.
I appreciate that, Steve. Awesome. Question for David. So what do you feel like implementing the Certified Burn Manager program would mean to consultants, contractors actively engaged in delivering prescribed fire services?
There would be two main benefits that I would see. One is there's increasingly in the last couple of years a challenge with getting liability insurance. I've had liability insurance for 25 years that explicitly covers prescribed burning, but at some point, as burning became a bigger thing nationwide and wildfires became worse, prescribed burn coverage got pushed into the specialty market, meaning that fewer carriers would touch it and prices increased dramatically. And that pool of potential carriers has really shrunk seemingly every year. So to the point where our recent carrier just offered a renewal, but said, that they're now instituting a wildfire exclusion. And one of the definitions of wildfire in their exclusions is prescribed burns that escape. So basically, they're offering coverage, but explicitly excluding coverage for any event that that it doesn't go as planned. So if there is some additional degree of liability protection offered by the burn manager program, ideally, insurance companies would look at that and see an eased level of protection for them. I know that I was talking with my insurance agent recently, and she was saying that this has occurred because of an increased number of prescribed burns nationwide that have resulted in large payouts by insurance companies. So more and more of them are getting kind of gun shy about underwriting. And then the other thing is, I think most fire departments have been generally pretty easy to work with, and we work with many fire departments across the state of Michigan. Most of them are super laid back about the permitting process. We provide the burn plan, talk it through if necessary, and they issue a permit. But there's definitely a small number of jurisdictions where either the fire chief or the fire marshal is really hesitant about offering permits, or they just have outright bans on unprescribed burns within their jurisdictions. And so being able to point to a burn manager, certified burn manager program would hopefully kind of really smooth the way for those jurisdictions and allow fire to occur in those areas. So I think that would be the main benefits that I think would come to private contractors, specifically around prescribed burning.
Awesome. Yeah. So those two being is a potential a reduction in insurance costs / ease of getting insurance, and then reducing the difficulties in obtaining a permit from local fire departments. Excellent. So I would like to steer it back to James and kind of pose the same question, but for those contractors, consultants that are not currently active in prescribed fire services, who may be currently recommending them, but their business hasn't expanded to that point where they offer those services. What kind of reflections, reactions would you have for if this program was implemented?
Yeah, well, the big thing would be having the training and the capacity to implement prescribed burns. And so it sounds like David is maxed out to an extent. I'd love to, work with him on, implementing some of these projects that, that I propose to my clients. I'd like to, as mentioned, I'd really like to, dive super deeply into, how I can improve my, my clients' properties from an ecological perspective. What benefits can I bring with the prescribed fire? And, I have several clients who are, academic clients or nature centers and so forth, and kind of applying this in those contexts where the ecology is the top priority would be just, really, provide growth for me and just amazing learning opportunities and improving ecological health at some of these really special, wonderful places. And, I think that, it'd just be really great to see kind of all of us consulting foresters just having this something that we all do, we collaborate. Obviously you need kind of a larger team. I'm currently one person. I'd love to hire more people, expand my business, and just do more in every area. But I just see tons of areas of growth, service, and I know that the Association of Consulting Foresters has a liability insurance plan, and that potentially does cover the for controlled burning, prescribed burning, but I haven't had a chance to look into what the implications would be, and costs and so forth, in addition to the current basic liability that I have. So I know it exists, but I can't speak to whether today that's cost prohibitive or not. But yeah, kind of all the above. Just having kind of all the bases covered, knowing with confidence I could go out there if I know what I'm doing and have the training and the equipment, that it's not going to be something that shuts me down. And I think other consulting foresters would feel the exact same way if we could just be doing it as just a regular tool, something we're doing all the time. That'd be fantastic.
Awesome. Appreciate that, James. I would just note that I have two more planned questions that I would like to deliver. But Michelle, if there are any specific questions that come up that are kind of related to what we're talking about at the moment, feel free to interject and insert those. But otherwise, I will move to Glenn and ask, I know that you listed several kind of barriers or what the DNR is currently trying to work through as they prepare to launch this and are seeking to do so. And I was wondering if you maybe could comment on what you thought was the biggest barrier? Like what's the biggest hurdle that you've got to overcome before this can be implemented?
Yeah, I talked about a lot of those it really is just a lot of little things. I don't think there's any one really huge thing. I think the biggest thing is just staff time and being able to actually focus on it, dive into it, and get all these little pieces, all the loose ends tied up, and actually have a program that we can roll out. So I think, obviously that comes back to funding, but I think that's the biggest issue is time and being able to dedicate some staff time to really get it up and running, and then to be able to be assured that we're going to have the ability to keep it running once we do get it started. The last thing we want to do is start it up and get 10 people certified and then never do anybody else again, and that kind of a thing. We wouldn't want that. So once we get it up and running, we want to make sure we can keep it running.
Fantastic. And then along those lines, the final question I kind of pre-thought out here was just thinking about funding. So I think a lot of people could chime in on this, but would specifically like to know from David what your thoughts are on in terms of paying for something like this. Would this be something you'd be willing to pay for? Would you want to know what the relative benefits are before you agreed to saying a cost? But just commenting on that. And then also would like to give some space for James in this arena to state some of the programs that you've discovered that potentially could pay for some of that. So I'll start with David.
Yeah, well, I would say for sure that if and when the state does implement the certified burn manager program, we would pursue that. I would pursue that to be a certified burn manager. Just the benefit of being able to say to local fire departments, that we're certified, I think would certainly ease the process and ease their, increase their peace of mind. What we would pay for that kind of thing, I guess like you say, it would depend on what the benefits ended up being, but certainly, probably a couple $100 if it's a 5-year certification process. And I guess I would, there'd be a point at which it would be cost prohibitive, but I'm not offhand sure what that would be.
Excellent. And then James, you have some information for us about kind of some avenues that you've explored for funding something like this?
Well, so far just one, but I think it's a really appealing one. So I had seen an article from Michigan Works about all the different training programs they have, and they have kind of 2 tracks. You can either apply kind of for your own company, or you can apply as a consortium. So you can pull together a whole industry or whole group of companies and essentially apply as this group or consortium. And I just applied for an individual one recently. I got funded. It really wasn't that hard, and the state has tons of money right now for training. And so kind of what I was discussing with Andy and Mike Small again is that we just pulled together all the companies, like David's, like these other consorters, other companies involved in ecological restoration, all come together and say, here's what we want to do. We want to put on this course, and then you can get, I think it's up to $1,500 per company or per person. I can't remember the details, but it would essentially cover probably not all, but most of the cost of putting this on. And then Andy can speak to the details of MSU, but they're pretty well set up for putting on different short courses and so forth, and trying to find a combination, maybe utilizing those funds plus obviously, each company would probably have to pay something, but we'd at least have that cost share and kind of pull it together in an MSU course that might be combined hybrid, hybrid online in person. And so anyway, I just think it's a really promising opportunity. And we could perhaps even search for other grant funding to supplement that.
Yeah, and I do want to walk it back just a little bit to say that in general, partnering with some higher education institution that has experience in delivering online programming could be an avenue for the DNR once they develop that. But if anyone else has anything to share about perhaps a potential way, it does seem like, $1,500 per person could be a good way, apply once to the Michigan Works program and get a influx of resources to kind of do that upfront work, that the heavier lift of delivering it once, and then subsequent years will probably have less expenses. But if anyone else has any comments on the resources or funding to deliver that, otherwise I would love to hear from Michelle on some questions that were submitted via the chat.
I'm seeing a couple things. One of them is, some doubt about how much this program would actually increase getting fire on the ground. Does anybody have any experience or knowledge of other states who've done this program that they could share regarding their experience and how, if it brought anything to the table in those places?
I'll comment on that a little bit. The state of Ohio does have a certified burn manager program, and they, quite a number of folks in particularly like the municipal parks districts, as well as some of the conservancies were certified. There was also created a pretty big business for people and availability for people to do like CRP burning or mid-contract burning with a lot of the NRCS programs, which is a real need. You get signed up for a program, they say that this is a practice that you can use, but sometimes it's difficult to find those folks to help you do it. So there, I would say it did increase the amount of burning that was happening. Certainly didn't, or at least hasn't yet scaled it up to, the size that is actually needed to fulfill all of the needs.
If I could jump in too, I think that there's a lot of demand for burning, obviously, and there are currently a decent number of contractors. There's always room for more, for sure. But my impression has not been that the number of burns that are getting done on the ground, the limited number is a result of the lack of a certification program, burn certification program. Rather, I feel like it's that there would probably be more folks that would jump into contracting if they, in order to jump in, you need to have enough burns lined up to warrant the cost of liability insurance. And unless you have that, unless you kind of get over that hump of that upfront cost, it's pretty prohibitive to get into it, I think. That's my impression, and that if this does result in a decreased cost of insurance, or there can be some insurance program that's pulled together through the Prescribed Fire Council or another organization, that would have a real impact on a number of folks that were getting into leading prescribed burns across the state.
Is there something that we can do as a council, or members of the council can do as individuals or organizations, that can help encourage our legislators to provide the funding to the DNR to make this program a reality?
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer. I mean, anything we can do to try to promote prescribed burning and try to promote this program. So yeah, I don't know what the best route would be for that. So we're working the internal route, trying to get some funding.
Glenn, you're cutting out every couple of words.
Oh, sorry about that. Maybe my earpiece is starting to. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's tough to say. I think we're trying the internal angle, and that's the best we can do on our side. So I guess I think communicating the advantages of the program would be a good thing. If we think it is, obviously people have said there's probably some advantages to it. We don't know for sure if the insurance rates would go down or if it'd be easier, but we think they would. Maybe looking into that some more would be a good thing. I think at the regional level too, the Northeast Midwest Prescribed Fire Group has been looking into kind of insurance and that sort of aspect as well. And I think that would be a good thing and may help to promote our program as well if it turns out that they can show that that really is a big deal. Because short of that insurance thing, maybe it isn't as important as some people think it is. So yeah, I think determining and really, if you really think it's important, then pushing the importance of it is probably the best thing.
Yeah, and it's a great point made by Glenn that I would also mention that like at the national level of Prescribed Fire Council, the National Prescribed Fire Councils are pushing for this to have some kind of like standardized certified burn manager program that can be developed and then distributed to all states, so that then there is this national recognition, or at least Eastern area regional recognition of it, that then would potentially have a greater impact on insurance rates, given that most insurance companies are greater than one state in focus, and so would have to have that happen to be able to affect their rates. Is there any other questions there in the chat, Michelle?
Is the council working directly with any state legislators on this? Which at this point we are not. And I know it's a tender place for those who are agency employees, because as an agency employee, you're not supposed to be advocating or managing those kinds of things politically. But there are many members within the council who are not in that position, and perhaps we could lean on them. So I'll throw that out there, particularly to the non-agency folks and or Don. I know that you have the retirement perspective and you can actually say things that you might not have been able to say in the past. So,
and I would also expand the question to refer to Bill Litz's response that he posted in there, that if you're working with anyone in other states that do have developed certified burn manager programs.
Don, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Here we go. The one thing that I would say, and I don't want to pour cold water on the idea, but I would say exercise a little caution, because in this era of term limits, one thing legislators love to do is they will just put it in an agency's boilerplate and say you must do that, and not a dime ever appear. We've been nailed by that before. So I would say the broader the support you can generate within the legislature, perhaps the better it would go. One legislator, and this is speculation on my part, let me be honest. I think it's a little easier to just insert a boilerplate thing and say, there, see, I fixed that, when in fact nothing really happened. I saw a question earlier too, can outside groups fund this? And in fact, James was kind of alluding to that. There are possibilities for that, as Glenn knows, but remember that the DNR cannot spend a dime that the legislature does not appropriate. So, there would be some initial upfront work that would have to be done to provide a mechanism to move those dollars through and get them appropriated so that they could be put to use. It's not quite as simple as just getting a grant.
Good point. Is there any final thoughts, anything that any of the panelists would like to make sure that was mentioned? That was a good discussion. It was a great review by Glenn, absolutely, of the program and where we are. And I really appreciate all of our panelists joining us and sharing their perspectives. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that conversation. There's nothing additional that anyone would like to say. Thanks again. And that will conclude our session on the Certified Burn Manager Program. So thanks to everyone who participated in that. So that does conclude our second day of the 8th Annual Burning Issues Workshop and our 22nd annual meeting of the Michigan's Prescribed Fire Council meeting. I really appreciate everyone's time and attention, and hope that it was a good way to entertain yourself on this snowy, cold, blustery, blizzardy morning. And we really appreciate you joining us today. So just in quick review, our first day, we had an awesome panel of speakers on growing season burning and some discussion of smoke management from Eagle by Jennifer Dixon. We then had today the Brittle Fire session and our Certified Burn Manager Program session. So that was the entirety of our agenda. And I would like to thank again all of our speakers and panelists for making this possible, and bolded in drawing your specific attention to today's speakers and panelists. We really truly appreciate your efforts in making this event a reality. I will note for everyone to watch for an email from us, from the council. So if you're not on our email list, be sure to visit our website and get on that. But this email will go out to all registrants. So you'll get that automatically by registering and being here. And we will be asking for an evaluation of this, as well as providing you links to all the recordings and PDFs of presentations. So you can look forward to that. And then finally, I would like to note to support us. And if you're interested in advancing issues around prescribed fire in the state, to consider actively being engaged within our steering committee, as well as our various subcommittees that address issues related to that. As well as supporting us, you can donate online or purchase some fancy, awesome swag that we have available there. So that does conclude today's session, as well as the overall session. I really appreciate everyone for joining us, and wish you all the best as you make your way out in the cold today. So thanks again, and thanks again to our speakers, and thanks again to our planning committee and everyone involved in putting this on. Thanks, and have a great day.